The world knew Whitney Houston as the voice that could shatter glass and mend broken hearts. But at 2 o'clock in the morning, sitting alone in her marble bathroom with an empty pill bottle in one hand and her phone in the other, Whitney's legendary voice was completely silent. She hadn't sung in 3 weeks, not because she couldn't, but because she had forgotten why she ever started. The woman who had given the world "I Will Always Love You" had stopped loving herself entirely. Her marriage to Bobby Brown was disintegrating in spectacular fashion. The tabloids were printing stories that grew more vicious by the day. And the addiction that had started years ago as a way to manage the crushing pressure of perfection had become the only thing she felt she could control anymore. But what none of the gossip magazines knew, what even her closest family members didn't fully understand, was that Whitney Houston was planning to end her life that night. She had written letters to her daughter Bobby Christina, to her mother Sissy, to everyone who had ever loved her or believed in her. The letters were sealed and stacked neatly on her dresser. She had called her lawyer earlier that evening to make sure her affairs were in order. Everything was prepared. She just needed the courage to follow through. Whitney stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror and saw a stranger wearing her face. The eyes that had once sparkled with joy and confidence now looked hollow and defeated. The smile that had lit up stages around the world was nowhere to be found. She was 47 years old and felt like she had lived 1,000 lifetimes, each one more exhausting than the last. Then her phone rang, at exactly 2 in the morning. It was a number she didn't recognize, a California area code that wasn't familiar to her. For a moment, she considered not answering. Who calls at this hour except reporters trying to catch her in a vulnerable moment? But something made her pick up the phone. Maybe it was fate. Maybe it was divine intervention. Or maybe it was just that even in her darkest moment, some part of Whitney Houston still believed that something or someone might have an answer she hadn't found yet. The voice on the other end was unmistakable even though she hadn't spoken to him in nearly 2 years. "Whitney, it's Stevie. I need you to listen to something. Don't hang up. Just listen." Before she could respond, before she could ask how Stevie Wonder got her new private number or why he was calling in the middle of the night, she heard the sound of piano keys. Stevie had placed his phone near his piano and was beginning to play something she had never heard before. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, starting with simple notes that gradually built into something more complex and emotionally powerful. Whitney, still holding the pill bottle in her other hand, found herself unable to move. The music was reaching through the phone line and wrapping itself around her like a lifeline she hadn't known she was searching for. To understand why Stevie Wonder called Whitney Houston at 2 in the morning, you have to go back to 1985, when they first met at the American Music Awards. Whitney was just 21 years old and had recently released her debut album. She was talented beyond measure, but absolutely terrified of the spotlight that was beginning to shine on her. Stevie, already a legend with decades of experience navigating the brutal music industry, had watched her perform that night and recognized something familiar in her eyes. He saw the same fear he had felt as a young blind boy being pushed onto stages and told to perform for audiences who only saw his disability rather than his humanity. After the show, Stevie had found Whitney backstage and told her something she never forgot. He said that her voice was a gift that didn't belong to her alone, but to everyone who would ever hear it, and that the weight of carrying such a gift would sometimes feel unbearable. He told her that there would be nights when she wanted to run away from it all, moments when the pressure would feel like it was crushing her, and times when she would question whether any of it was worth the cost. And he promised her that if she ever reached that breaking point, if she ever felt like she couldn't carry the weight anymore, she should call him, and he would remind her why her voice mattered. They had stayed in contact over the years, not constantly, but enough that Whitney considered Stevie one of the few people in the industry who truly understood what it meant to live under the kind of microscope that both of them experienced. But as Whitney's personal life began to unravel in the late 1990s, she had gradually pulled away from everyone who cared about her, including Stevie. The shame of her addiction, the embarrassment of her failing marriage, and the constant judgment from the media had made her retreat into isolation. She stopped returning calls. She avoided industry events. She built walls around herself that even her closest friends couldn't penetrate. What Whitney didn't know was that Stevie had been worried about her for months. He had heard the rumors about her declining health and her increasingly erratic behavior. He had listened to industry insiders whisper about how bad things had gotten. And on this particular February night, Stevie had woken up at 1:30 in the morning with an overwhelming feeling that something was terribly wrong. He couldn't explain it rationally. It was just a deep intuition that Whitney was in danger and that he needed to reach her immediately. He had called his assistant and asked for Whitney's current phone number, something that took nearly 30 minutes to track down given how many times she had changed numbers to avoid the press. When he finally got the number and made the call, Stevie didn't know if Whitney would even answer. But he knew that if she did, he had to be ready to give her a reason to keep living. The piece he played for her that night wasn't something he had written beforehand. It was completely improvised, flowing from his fingers in real time as he thought about Whitney's journey, her pain, and the incredible gift she possessed. The melody started soft and melancholic, acknowledging the darkness she was feeling. Then it began to shift, introducing notes of hope and resilience. The music was telling a story without words, communicating things that language alone could never express. As Stevie played, Whitney found herself sinking down onto the cold bathroom floor, still holding the phone to her ear with one hand. The pill bottle slipped from her other hand and rolled across the tile, its contents scattering but no longer calling to her with the same urgency. Something about Stevie's music was reaching past all her defenses, past all the pain and shame and exhaustion, touching something deep inside her that remembered what it felt like to believe in beauty and possibility. When Stevie finally stopped playing after nearly 10 minutes, there was a long silence on both ends of the phone. Whitney couldn't speak because she was crying too hard. Stevie couldn't speak because he was waiting to see if his musical message had reached her. Finally, Whitney managed to whisper just 2 words through her tears. "I'm scared." Those 2 words opened a floodgate. For the next hour and 45 minutes, Whitney and Stevie had the most honest and vulnerable conversation of both their lives. Whitney told him everything. She told him about the drugs and how they had started as a way to manage her anxiety before performances, but had gradually taken over every aspect of her life. She told him about her marriage and how the love she and Bobby had once shared had turned toxic and destructive. She told him about the crushing weight of being America's sweetheart while feeling like a fraud who was barely holding herself together. She told him about the voices in her head that constantly reminded her of every mistake she had made, every person she had disappointed, every opportunity she had wasted. And she told him about the plan she had made for that night, about the letters on her dresser and the pills that were now scattered across her bathroom floor. Stevie listened to all of it without judgment, without trying to minimize her pain or offer easy solutions. He just listened with the kind of complete attention that made Whitney feel truly heard for the first time in years. When she finished telling him everything, Stevie began to share his own story in a way he rarely did publicly. He told her about the times in his own life when the pressure of fame had nearly broken him, about the relationships that had failed because people couldn't separate Stevie Wonder the legend from Stevie Morris the man. He told her about nights when he had questioned whether his music mattered at all, whether he was making any real difference in the world, or just entertaining people for a few minutes before they forgot about him and moved on to the next thing. He told her about the darkness that sometimes comes with being able to see the world more clearly than others, even when you're physically blind. And then Stevie told Whitney something that cut through all her despair like a lighthouse beam cutting through fog. He said that the reason her pain felt so unbearable was because her capacity for love and connection was so enormous. The same depth of emotion that allowed her to sing with such power and vulnerability also meant that she felt hurt more intensely than most people. Her sensitivity wasn't a weakness. It was the source of her gift. And while that gift came with a terrible cost, the world was better because she had chosen to share it. He reminded her of specific moments in her career when her voice had touched people in ways that nothing else could. He told her about letters he had heard about from military families who had played the greatest love of all at funerals for fallen soldiers. He told her about cancer patients who had requested "I Will Always Love You" as the last song they wanted to hear before passing away. He told her about countless people who had found the strength to keep going during their own dark times because Whitney's music had reminded them that beauty and hope still existed in the world. Then Stevie said something that Whitney would remember for the rest of her life. He said, "Your voice doesn't belong to the record companies or the critics or even to your fans. It belongs to the universe itself. You're just the channel it flows through. And if you close that channel tonight, you're not just ending your own pain. You're silencing something that the world desperately needs to hear." Whitney, still sitting on her bathroom floor with tears streaming down her face, asked Stevie how she was supposed to keep going when everything felt so broken and hopeless. His answer was simple but profound. You don't have to fix everything tonight. You just have to make it to tomorrow. And then tomorrow you just have to make it to the next day. We don't save our lives all at once in one dramatic moment. We save them one breath, one choice, one day at a time. As they talked deep into the night, something shifted inside Whitney. The overwhelming urge to end her pain began to transform into something different, a small but growing curiosity about what might be possible if she chose to stay and fight for her life one more time. It wasn't a magical cure. She was still struggling with addiction. Her marriage was still falling apart. The media was still brutal. But Stevie had reminded her that she didn't have to face any of it alone, and that her story wasn't over yet. As their phone call stretched past 4 a.m, Stevie made Whitney a promise. He told her that he was going to write a song specifically for her, a song that captured everything they had talked about that night. But he said the song wouldn't be complete until she sang it with him. He needed her voice to finish what he was beginning. This promise gave Whitney something concrete to hold on to, a reason to stay alive that extended beyond that single night. She had a commitment to Stevie now, an obligation to show up and be part of creating something new. It was a lifeline disguised as a creative collaboration. Before they hung up, Stevie played one more piece for Whitney. This time it was a song she knew well, one of his own compositions called As. The lyrics about eternal love and commitment took on new meaning in the context of their conversation. Stevie was telling Whitney through his music that he would stand by her through her recovery, that she didn't have to face her demons alone. When Whitney finally ended the call at 4:37 in the morning, she did something she hadn't done in months. She got up off the bathroom floor, gathered up all the pills that had scattered across the tile, and flushed them down the toilet. Then she went to her dresser and tore up every single one of the goodbye letters she had written. She wasn't better yet. She wasn't healed. But she had decided to stay alive and see what tomorrow might bring. The next morning, Whitney called her mother Sissy and told her she needed help. Within 48 hours, she had checked herself into a treatment facility, beginning the long and difficult process of confronting her addiction. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks and relapses. There were days when Whitney questioned whether she had the strength to keep fighting. But during those darkest moments, she would think about Stevie's piano playing in the middle of the night and his promise that they would create something beautiful together if she just kept going. True to his word, Stevie spent the next several months working on a song that he said was incomplete without Whitney's voice. He would call her periodically during her treatment, playing her snippets of melodies and asking for her input. These calls became touchstones for Whitney, reminders that someone believed in her ability to not just survive, but to create again. The song they eventually recorded together was never released commercially. It remained private, something sacred between two artists who had saved each other in different ways. Whitney kept a recording of it that she would listen to whenever she felt herself slipping back into old patterns of self-destruction. The melody that Stevie had improvised at 2 a.m. had evolved into something fuller and more complex, but its essence remained the same. It was a musical representation of hope persisting through darkness, of beauty emerging from pain, of the choice to keep living even when everything feels impossible. Whitney's recovery was not a straight line. There were good days and terrible days. She continued to struggle with her marriage and eventually divorced Bobby Brown in 2007. The media never stopped being cruel. The damage that years of drug use had done to her legendary voice was permanent and heartbreaking. But Whitney never forgot what Stevie had taught her that night. She learned to measure her success not by chart positions or critical reviews, but by whether she had made it through another day without destroying herself. She began to reach out to other artists who were struggling with similar demons, offering them the same kind of unconditional support that Stevie had given her. In 2009, Whitney released an album called I Look to You that was widely seen as her comeback record. The title track, which became one of her most powerful late-career performances, was inspired by that phone call with Stevie. The lyrics about looking to a higher power for strength and guidance captured what Whitney had experienced during her darkest night. When she performed the song live, she would often close her eyes and think about Stevie's piano playing coming through the phone at 2 a.m, reminding her that she wasn't alone. Stevie attended Whitney's comeback concert at Radio City Music Hall in 2009 and watched from the audience as she sang with renewed power and purpose. After the show, They met backstage and embraced for a long time without saying anything. Words weren't necessary. They both understood the profound bond that had been created between them that February night 8 years earlier. Whitney told Stevie that she thought about his phone call almost every day, that it had become her mental bookmark for what real friendship and compassion looked like. Stevie told her that calling her that night was one of the most important things he had ever done, that saving her life had given his own music deeper meaning. The story of Stevie's 2 a.m. phone call remained private during Whitney's lifetime. She never spoke about it publicly because it felt too sacred to share with the world. Only her closest family members knew that Stevie Wonder had quite literally saved her life with a phone call and a piano. But after Whitney's tragic death in 2012, Stevie felt that the story needed to be told. Not to glorify himself, but to help other people understand that sometimes the most important thing we can do for someone in crisis is simply show up and remind them that they matter. In an interview later that year, Stevie talked about how that night had taught him about the power of music to reach people even when words fail, about how sometimes just being present with someone in their pain can be the difference between life and death. He said that Whitney's voice was one of the greatest gifts the world had ever received, and that he felt honored to have played even a small role in helping her find the strength to share that gift for a few more years. The phone call that night didn't fix everything. It didn't solve Whitney's addiction or heal all her wounds or prevent her eventual tragic end. But it did give her more time, more moments with her daughter, more opportunities to touch people with her music, more days to experience both joy and sorrow, and everything in between. And those extra years mattered profoundly to the countless people whose lives were touched by Whitney's voice and her story of struggle and resilience. When Stevie Wonder performed at Whitney's funeral, singing his classic song Ribbon in the Sky, everyone who knew the story of that phone call understood that he wasn't just honoring a fellow artist. He was saying goodbye to someone he had fought to keep in this world, someone whose voice he had believed was too important to lose without a fight. The tears streaming down Stevie's face as he sang weren't just tears of grief. They were tears of gratitude for the extra time they had gotten together, for the music they had created, for the profound connection that had been forged between two souls on a dark February night when one phone call had made all the difference. Today, when people listen to Whitney Houston's music, they hear the obvious things: the incredible range, the emotional depth, the technical perfection. But those who know the full story hear something else too. They hear the voice of someone who chose to stay when everything inside her was screaming to go. They hear the sound of resilience, of fighting through darkness, of accepting help when it was offered. They hear the echo of Stevie Wonder's piano playing at 2 a.m, reaching through a phone line to remind a hurting soul that life was still worth living. This story teaches us that we never truly know when someone around us is fighting their last battle. We never know when a simple gesture of reaching out might be the exact thing that saves a life. Stevie Wonder didn't have any special knowledge that Whitney was in crisis that night. He just followed an intuition that something was wrong and made the choice to act on it. And in doing so, he gave the world a few more years of Whitney Houston's extraordinary gift. The next time you feel prompted to check on someone, to reach out to a friend who's been distant, to make that call even when it seems inconvenient or awkward, remember this story. Remember that sometimes the most important things we do in life happen at 2 a.m, when we follow our instincts to connect with another human being who needs to know they're not alone. Whitney Houston's voice may be silent now, but the lesson of that February night continues to echo. We all have the power to be someone's lifeline. We all can choose compassion over convenience. And we all can use whatever gifts we have, whether it's music or simply our presence, to remind someone that their life has value and meaning. That's the legacy of the night Stevie Wonder called Whitney Houston at 2 a.m. and played piano until her darkness began to lift. It's a reminder that heroes don't always wear capes or make grand gestures. Sometimes they just pick up the phone and refuse to hang up until they know the person on the other end remembers why life is worth fighting for.